Hello and welcome to the Frans van Kath interview. I'm Annette Young. This week, America is marking the 10th anniversary of when Al-Qaeda operatives flew those planes into the World Trade Center. But 10 years on, where exactly are we in the fight against terrorism? And did the killing back in May of Osama bin Laden signal the beginning of the end for Al-Qaeda? Jack Clunan is a 25-year veteran of FBI. He's also a renowned international security expert. He spent 6 years in the FBI working in their special Osama bin Laden unit, and he joins me now from New York. Jack Clunan, thank you so much for giving us some of your precious time. Let me start by asking you, when you saw those planes fly into the Twin Towers, did you and your FBI colleagues immediately suspect it was the work of Al-Qaeda?
Yes, we did. Even though there was a lot of confusion on the airways and on the street as to whether or not it was a simple accident, small plane flying in, we knew, frankly, looking at certainly the second plane being the size of the plane, that it was Al-Qaeda. A lot of people don't realize is that we had a lot of information about what Al-Qaeda wanted to do vis-a-vis using large planes as weapons of mass destruction. So there was no doubt in our mind who orchestrated it and the reasons why.
And I understand you actually lost your former boss, John O'Neill, in that attack.
We did. John O'Neill had taken up the position as the security director for the World Trade Center only 4 days before the attacks. From what we could piece together, John went back into the first tower shortly before it collapsed. He ran out, and they did find his body, unfortunately. A very, very, very sad moment for all of us. We lost another dear friend, Lenny Hatton, who was an FBI agent. And again, it's 10 years later, the pain is still there, and you always ask yourselves, what if? What could we have done differently?
This last decade has no doubt been shaped by the events of that day, and also it reshaped the way in which the West fought terrorist groups. But casting your mind back, Jack, has the war against terror actually been effective?
Well, I do believe in the aggregate the war on terrorism has been very, very effective. If you isolate both Iraq and Afghanistan, you concentrate specifically on Afghanistan, and in the northern region where it crosses over into Pakistan, the United States has promulgated a rather unpopular series of wars, but the way we have attacked it in the last 3 to 4 years, that is Al-Qaeda, we have changed our footprint a little bit in the country, and we have targeted the echelon, the higher echelon of Al-Qaeda. We have done a lot to eviscerate its top leadership. There's no question that Al-Qaeda is not what it used to be, but it has metastasized, make no bones about that. We know that there's Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, we know there's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The threat has not been eliminated. We've done an awful lot to protect the homeland. We're connecting the dots a lot better, we're sharing intelligence a lot better, and we're much safer. Doesn't mean the threat has been eliminated, however.
See, and that's my next question. Just how much of a serious threat does it still pose?
It still poses a very serious threat, and I want to remind you of a conversation that I had with one of bin Laden's closest advisors, who is very, very close to Ayman Zawahiri. And he told me that he said it'll take them at least 10 years to reconstitute themselves, and they will try to strike on the 10th anniversary. I mean, this information I had was obtained a long time ago. But when you think about it, you see that the FBI and the Homeland Security recently put out a report warning about Al-Qaeda still wanting to use planes as weapons of mass destruction, and it's been targeted on the 10th anniversary. So the threat has not been eliminated, but again, we are a lot safer. We have tried to convince our partners overseas, including the French government and the British in particular, that we need their assistance, we need their help. We're never going to eliminate this threat. The attitudes that Al-Qaeda thinks about, the philosophy that it espoused, still resonates with hundreds of thousands of young Muslim men who still feel exploited. But I have to believe that given the uprisings and the so-called Arab Spring, that there's manifest destiny here, that things are changing for the better.
Well, certainly Al Qaeda had almost a zero profile in the Arab Spring. Do you think as a result that its influence is waning in the region?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that Al Qaeda didn't have an interest in that. You can rest assured, if you want to say that Libya was part of the Arab Spring, I can assure you that remnants of the Libyan armed fighting groups who had a link to Al Qaeda marched in with the rebels. That'll be something that we'll have to watch very, very closely. Anywhere that Al Qaeda can gain a foothold, if there is uncertainty, there's economic disparity, if there's political confusion and dysfunction, Al Qaeda will try to seek a foothold. Make no mistake about that.
Now, and this is what I want to talk to you about. The fact is, in Algeria in the next few days is going to be hosting a conference talking about Al Qaeda's North African wing. It also is very concerned about the fact that they believe that there are elements within the National Transitional Council in Libya who are closely associated to Al Qaeda. Is there any reason for them, I mean, are their concerns legitimate? And if so, how worried should Western intelligence agencies be?
Well, it's really not a question of whether they are worried. They are worried. We don't have the insight into Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb as we did to the mainline Al Qaeda groups operating in Afghanistan and Iraq. We just don't have the intel. We are trying and we're working very, very hard. One of the things that you have to do to countermand the threat posed in Algeria and the Maghreb, and in Libya in particular, you have to be very, very proactive. The United States is going to have to work very closely with the transitional governments, and we are going to have to seek a lot of information from our allies, including the Algerian government, who the United States really doesn't have a really close working relationship with. But we're going to have to get a lot better at that.
Do you think that is going to happen? Do you think that there's willingness on their side as much as there's willingness on Washington for that to occur?
Well, I think that the United States doesn't have the hubris that it used to. We know that we can't solve this problem, the U.S. going it alone. We know that there's no pure monetary solution to this. And frankly, the U.S. is not going to solve these problems militarily. We are stretched very, very thin. We cannot ask our military to do any more than what it's doing. So, as in the case in Libya, look what we did. We reached out to the French government. The French government was in the vanguard. They took the lead. We reached out to the British government. And I think this administration realizes that this is the key to success. And yes, we will have our disagreements as countries. There's no question about that. But in the end, what we're all trying to do is to protect our people. And there's no higher calling for Sarkozy. There's no higher calling for President Obama. That's what we have to do, and I believe, and I'm optimistic, that we will successfully countermand the threat posed by the groups like Al Qaeda in the Maghreb and Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
Now, in the last few days, with the crumbling of the Gaddafi regime, all sorts of documents have come to light, and they've revealed this process known as rendition, where terror suspects have been transferred to third parties or third countries for interrogation or imprisonment, Libya being one of them. And as a result, it's revealed very close ties between the Gaddafi regime, the CIA, and the British spy agency MI6. It does reveal the very murky world of counter-terrorism, doesn't it? It's certainly not a squeaky clean sector.
It's never been a very black and white world. There's always a world of gray and confusion. On a personal note, I'm not a big fan of rendition at all. I think it really, in the long run, doesn't help the United States standing in the world. Yes, intelligence agencies across the spectrum, across the world, big deals with rather unsavory characters, and we did. When Gaddafi decided to abandon his nuclear program, when he decided to give up some of his biological chemical weapons, the United States took advantage of that. And I hope that the United States exploited whatever openings they had, because we had to anticipate that the Gaddafi regime was never somebody that we were completely comfortable with. Remember what he did to citizens in the United States. Remember what he did to citizens in France and what he did to citizens in the UK. He's not a person to be trusted. So yes, you sort of, one eye is always open on Gaddafi and what he's going to do. He's a man that will prevaricate the truth. He will kill people if it is in his means, and we're better off without him. But I hope that both the United States, the French, and the British governments use this rapprochement that we had with Libya to take advantage and to exploit the intelligence in there and to understand we're going to have to go in there, and hopefully we won't disband the apparatus, the intelligence apparatus that exists. We won't disband the military, because those were huge mistakes that we made in Iraq. We have to keep some civil society in place in Libya, because we're going to have to influence the outcome in that government. Yes, we're going to ask for democratic elections and all the things that those young Libyans want, but we have to be very, very mindful. We can't control everything, but we're going to have to reach out, we're going to have to build trust, we're going to have to use our influence, and yes, I dare say, we are going to have to use some money.
Jack Clunan, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being with us, and that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up shortly.